What you're dealing with in New York, what you are seeing and witnessing in the state, is a tiny fraction of what is happening every single day in the state of Texas.
Eagle Pass has become the heart of a developing battle between federal officials and state authorities in Texas about how to address the migrant problem and who has control over that portion of the border between the United States and Mexico with regard to immigration. On January 10th, Texas officials essentially prohibited United States Border Patrol officers from entering a 2.5-mile region near Eagle Pass, which had experienced an increase in the number of migrants crossing the border. This caused the disagreement to become more intense. Because of this, the United States Army had to battle off migrants, in addition to numerous other tragic events. U.S. Army fighting off migrants at the Mexican-U.S. border.
Governor Greg Abbott announced plans to build a new military base at Eagle Pass to support up to 2,300 incoming National Guard soldiers pledged by Republican governors last month.
This region has Shelby Park, a municipal park located on the Rio Grande that has been blocked off with gates and razor wire, severely restricting the ability of the Border Patrol to enter the park. On January 12th, 3 people, including a mother and 2 children, drowned in a neighboring section of the Rio Grande. This occurred after the Texas Military Department seized and secured Shelby Park. The authorities from Texas and the United States of America have blamed each other for being responsible for the events that led up to the disaster. And since then, other unforeseen occurrences have taken place. The border issues started on January 10th. According to Robert Danley, who serves as the Senior Field Coordinator for the United States Customs and Border Protection in the Del Rio region, the Texas National Guard prevented the Border Patrol from installing mobile surveillance equipment within Shelby Park. The news was informed by a law enforcement source who is familiar with operations that Texas has issued a statement denying the Border Patrol entry to numerous miles of the border. Around that time, state officials began building razor wire, fences, and gates in order to prevent access to Shelby Park, which is next to a golf course, as well as an area under the port of entry bridge that federal agents had been utilizing as a waiting place for migrants. The drowning of a mother and 2 children. According to what Danley stated, the National Institute of Migration in Mexico became aware of the drowning fatalities of 2 children and a mother that took place in the vicinity of the Shelby Park boat ramp at around 8 o'clock in the evening by Central Time. A supervisor from the Eagle Pass station of the Border Patrol was told of the 3 drownings at around 9 o'clock Central Time, according to a statement that Danley made to the United States Supreme Court. In addition, the National Institute of Migration of Mexico informed the supervisor of the Border Patrol that 2 further migrants were in a precarious situation on the United States side of the Rio Grande, close to the Shelby Park boat ramp, according to Danley. The acting Border Patrol supervisor responded to the Shelby Park entrance gate, which was closed upon his arrival, Danley wrote. According to Danley, the acting Border Patrol supervisor informed 3 guardsmen from the Texas National Guard through the gate that 3 migrants had drowned earlier in the evening, and 2 were in distress on the United States side of the river. During the course of the discussion, the gate remained locked, and the TNG guardsmen informed the acting supervisory Border Patrol agent via the gate that they had been instructed not to allow Border Patrol to enter through the gate or to provide Border Patrol entry to Shelby Park. After that, the supervisor of the Border Patrol wanted to meet with a supervisor of the Texas National Guard and once again transmitted the information that 3 migrants had perished earlier in the evening and that 2 migrants were in trouble on the United States side of the Rio Grande, according to Danley. The continuation of migrant deaths. According to what Danley wrote, Mexico's National Institute of Migration informed the Del Rio sector of the Border Patrol that 7 migrants, belonging to 2 different groups, had attempted to cross the Rio Grande the previous night. In the first batch, there were 5 migrants, a woman and 2 children who drowned, as well as 2 migrants who were saved by the National Institute of Migration in Mexico. In his statement, Danley said that Mexican authorities were successful in recovering the remains of the mother and 2 children who had drowned. 2 males were among the second batch of migrants who were successful in crossing the river and arriving on the American side. Mexican officials were able to save these 2 guys from certain death. Additionally, on January 13th, Texas granted the Border Patrol permission to use the boat ramp in the Shelby Park area, However, the state imposed some limits on the agency, including the need that information to be provided about every Border Patrol agent who entered the area and the provision of restricted access to the agency. The statements from President Joe Biden's administration. On January 15th, a Border Patrol agent drove via an access road inside the approximately 2.5-mile region, but the agent was stopped and questioned by a member of the Texas National Guard. On the same day, the administration of President Joe Biden presented a document to the Supreme Court that included information on the drowning deaths of migrants on January 12th. The deaths of 2 migrants who drowned, along with the rescue of 2 other migrants on the United States side of the Rio Grande by Mexican authorities, underscore that Texas is firm in its continued efforts to exercise complete control of the border and land in the region, as well as to block the access of the Border Patrol to the border, even in the event of an emergency, the administration wrote. It is impossible to say what might have happened if Border Patrol had its former access to the area, including through its surveillance trucks that assisted in monitoring the area, said the United States Solicitor General Elizabeth Prelogar in the petition that was submitted to the Supreme Court. On the other hand, the Border Patrol would have had the option to take whatever actions available to fulfill its obligations and aid its colleagues in the Mexican government in carrying out the rescue effort. This would have been the very minimum. Numerous issues occurred on January 17th. The Department of Homeland Security of the United States of America has established January 17th as the deadline by which the authorities in Texas must cease their blockage of Eagle Pass and enable federal agents to resume their activities in the region. The Department of Homeland Security said that it would refer the matter to the Department of Justice for appropriate action if Texas did not submit a compliance agreement by the end of the day. Nevertheless, the Office of Texas Attorney General Ken Paxton reaffirmed their position, stating that Texas will not surrender. Paxton rebutted several of the charges made by the federal government as false in a letter that was 3 pages long and sent to the Counsel for the Department of Homeland Security. According to Paxton, agents of the Border Patrol do in fact have access to Shelby Park in order to react to calls for medical assistance. To add insult to injury, Paxton said that on the night that the 3 migrants drowned, TMD did not prevent U.S. Border Patrol from entering Shelby Park to attempt a water rescue of migrants in distress. There was not even a boat available to the federal officials who were stationed at the gate, and they did not make a request for access based on any kind of medical emergency. Rather than doing that, the federal agents informed the staff sergeant of TMD that Mexican authorities had already collected deceased corpses and that the situation was under control, according to Paxton's letter. Despite this, Texas guardsmen conducted a thorough search, but they were only able to establish that Mexican authorities had found the remains of the migrants on their side of the river, which was located downstream from the Shelby Park boat launch. Additionally, on January 17th, police in Texas began detaining migrants at Shelby Park and charged them with criminal trespassing. This was the first arrest of migrants in the state since Texas gained control of the region 1 week earlier, according to an official. Texas's governor accused Joe Biden. A crew from the news that was stationed near Eagle Pass saw soldiers of the Texas National Guard constructing more razor wire and anti-climb fence in the Shelby Park neighborhood. In other words, both migrants and Border Patrol agents have been prevented from entering the area by the wire. The news was informed by a law enforcement source who is acquainted with operations that the federal government does not have any imminent plans for a big removal of the razor wire in the Eagle Pass region, unless the situation undergoes a significant shift or unless there is an emergency. According to the source, however, with the latest decision made by the Supreme Court, there may be instances in which federal law enforcement will cut or remove the wire in order to enforce immigration rules and in the event of a medical emergency. The news was informed by a different source inside the enforcement agency that federal agents were standing by, ready to breach the barrier in order to provide assistance to anybody who was in need of assistance, or if it was judged operationally necessary. Additionally, the governor of Texas delivered a statement in which he accused President Joe Biden of failing to perform his constitutional obligation to safeguard the borders of the country. By wasting taxpayer dollars to tear open Texas's border security infrastructure, President Biden has enticed illegal immigrants away from the 28 legal entry points along this state's southern border, bridges where nobody drowns, and into the dangerous waters of the Rio Grande. Abbott wrote. A deal to reopen contentious Shelby Park sections to federal border officers. The United States Department of Homeland Security has set a second deadline for the state of Texas to reach an agreement with regard to the complete reopening of contested areas of the Shelby Park region to federal border patrol officers. In a letter to Paxton, the General Counsel of the Department of Homeland Security, Jonathan E. Meyer, requested that Paxton please confirm that the state will provide the United States Border Patrol with the access described above by January 26, 2024. Please describe what access you plan to restrict in the event that the state responds to the request for access by denying it, in part, but not in whole. The statement from Texas's Attorney General. In a letter that was written to President Joe Biden and Secretary of the Department of Homeland Security Alejandro Mayorkas, more than 20 attorneys general signed a letter of support for the state of Texas's struggle to safeguard its border. He stated, "The efforts that Governor Abbott is doing to protect our border, as well as the work that Attorney General Paxton is doing to defend those efforts, should absolutely be supported rather than attacked. A country of laws is what we are." In addition, the letter said that if we did not have a border, we would shortly cease to exist as a country at all. Every single one of the 26 attorneys general from the states of Iowa, Utah, Alabama, Alaska, Arkansas, Florida, Georgia, Idaho, Indiana, Kansas, Kentucky, Louisiana, Mississippi, Missouri, Montana, Nebraska, New Hampshire, North Dakota, Oklahoma, Ohio, South Carolina, South Dakota, Tennessee, Virginia, West Virginia, and Wyoming signed the letter. Additionally, the letter was signed by members of the leadership of the Arizona State Legislature. Paxton said in a press release, "I would like to express my gratitude to my colleagues from all over the country for their support, as Texas continues to carry out the duties that Biden has refused to carry out." According to Biden, the invasion, which was promoted by his failure to respect federal statutory law, is the most significant danger that the nation is now facing. When it comes to protecting the United States of America and closing the border, Texas will continue to do all in its power. Greg Abbott's new plan to fight off migrants, an 80-acre installation that will be located close to Eagle Pass and will be able to accommodate up to 1,800 troops of the Texas National Guard, was revealed by Abbott. Before now, the Texas National Guard had been dispersed across this entire region in cramped quarters, away from fellow soldiers, and sometimes traveling long distances to do their job, the governor stated. This situation has changed because of the magnitude of what we're doing, because of the need to sustain and actually expand our efforts. It's essential that we build this base camp. It was said by him that the base camp would have the capacity to grow and accommodate a maximum of 2,300 different troops. As a result of the camp, Texas will be able to amass a large army in a very strategic area and increase the speed and flexibility of the Texas National Guard to be able to respond to crossings. Joe Biden is Donald Trump on the migrant crisis. The President of the United States, Joe Biden, and the former President of the United States, Donald Trump, each made separate trips to the border between the United States and Mexico in Texas, where they engaged in a competition to determine who had the most effective strategy for dealing with immigration. The simultaneous visits by the two politicians, which took place on the banks of the meandering border river and were 523 kilometers apart, brought to light the degree to which illegal immigration has become a contentious subject in front of a possible election rematch between the two candidates in November. In his visit to the city of Brownsville in the Rio Grande Valley, which has been the busiest route for border crossings for a long time, President Biden emphasized the need for a bipartisan border security measure, which was vehemently opposed by Republicans on the orders of President Trump. In order to garner support for a legislative effort to increase funds and tighten limits, he requested that the leading Republican candidate join him in doing so. "This is what we would say to Mr. Trump," said President Joe Biden. "Instead of engaging in political maneuvering with regard to the matter at hand, I would want for you to join me in urging Congress to approve this law. What you know and what I know is that it is the most stringent, most efficient, and most effective border security law that this nation has ever received." Eagle Pass is located a few hundred miles northwest of Brownsville, and it is there that President Trump met with members of the Texas National Guard who had installed razor wire barriers along the river's border. On the other hand, it was he who exclaimed, "This is like a war." In his statement, he referred to the migrants who were coming to the border as criminals and terrorists. He said that it was a terrible situation that they were being allowed to enter our nation. A further topic that Trump brought up was the tragic passing of a nursing student in Georgia who was 22 years old and was slain as she was out for a jog on her college campus. The case, in which the primary suspect is a migrant from Venezuela, is now at the center of the discussion on immigration rules and regulations. In other words, putting the responsibility on Biden's shoulders was Trump's strategy. Also, he said,
Crooked Joe is the blood of countless innocent victims. It's so many stories to tell.
Tougher measures. Due to a variety of factors, including climate change, conflict, and turmoil in other countries, as well as the economy, the number of migrants who cross the border into the United States from Mexico has been steadily increasing over the last several years. Despite the fact that there were record highs in December 2023, the number of arrests made for unauthorized crossings dropped by half in February 2024. Over the last several years, the discussion in Washington about immigration has moved farther to the right. Biden entered office in 2021 with the promise of reversing the strict immigration restrictions that Trump had implemented, but he has subsequently taken a more stringent approach to immigration. Last year, in response to criticism from Republicans who accuse him of failing to manage the border, President Biden made a request to Congress for more cash for border enforcement and said that he would shut down the border if given the right to send back migrants. Furthermore, immigration and border security have been Trump's trademark issues throughout his tenure as president. Also, there is a growing anxiety among Americans over immigration, according to a poll conducted by Reuters and Ipsos on January 31st. The survey indicated that 17% of respondents ranked immigration as the most critical issue confronting the United States of America today, which is a significant increase from 11% in December. But that's not all. It was the primary issue of Republican respondents, with 36% indicating it as their primary worry. This was higher than the 26% who identified the economy as their first concern. The ability of cities to take in migrants is a challenge. Since 2022, the state of Texas has been responsible for sending more than 100,000 migrants to blue cities, such as New York, Chicago, Philadelphia, Denver, Los Angeles, and Washington. In spite of the fact that these cities have traditionally protected immigrants by implementing sanctuary rules, they are presently having trouble with the large number of immigrants who are entering. Sheltering people is a major challenge, particularly during the winter months when temperatures are lower. The city of Chicago, for instance, has resorted to warming them in buses that are going to idle, and watchdogs have expressed worries about the conditions of the shelters after a child who is just 5 years old recently passed away. Also, Democratic mayors have been left with the responsibility of pushing for Congress to take action, which is very unlikely to occur given the divided political atmosphere. The judicial system is in significant disrepair. Migrants have the same legal rights as any other citizen, including the ability to seek asylum, which is established in both U.S. law and international law. On the other hand, the legal system that is responsible for determining whether or not migrants who arrive at the border are eligible for asylum or other forms of humanitarian protection is severely flawed. Additionally, the immigration courts, which are responsible for evaluating claims of asylum and humanitarian assistance, have a backlog of more than 2 million files and are chronically understaffed. In the year 2023, the resolution of such cases took an average of more than 2 years, during which time migrants might be imprisoned or allowed into the United States for various reasons. One may argue that this reality does not just encourage an increased number of migrants to attempt to breach the border. It is also a way for the United States to avoid its moral and legal commitments to asylum seekers. Although immigration law is infamous for being second in complexity only to the United States tax code, many migrants are forced to navigate the process on their own. Unlike in the criminal court system, there is no assurance of legal counsel, and some migrants may not even speak English. Furthermore, immigration law is notorious for being difficult to understand. This cannot be tolerated. Nevertheless, the plan that is now being considered by the Senate does not effectively address those issues. Instead, it relies on a wide power to refuse to accept migrants at times of very high demand. Any proposed changes would need to strike a balance between the United States' commitment to ensuring that migrants are not sent away to danger, as is mandated by law, and the reduction of the number of steps involved in the process. In the goal of accelerating this process, the government may begin by increasing the amount of resources that are allocated to the different stages of this process. It is possible that this may include the employment and dispatching of more non-law enforcement professionals who are trained to analyze asylum petitions, as well as an increase in the number of immigration judges and court staff members. As an additional benefit, providing legal assistance to migrants may make the process more streamlined for everyone concerned. The unfortunate reality is that it does not seem like Congress is willing to consider any of these potential remedies at this time. That's it for today. If you enjoyed this video, click on the boxes playing on your screen to watch similar content.